The medical liability waiver hit the vinyl mat sliding until it stopped dead at the toe of my flat shoe. "Sign it, you useless bitch!" Alex, the man I once called my husband, roared, his face twisted in cheap manufactured dominance. "Sign it and let's see if your pathetic arrogance saves your ribs from getting smashed to pieces. Sign it or I'll strip your custody rights and throw you out on the street like a stray dog." Standing right behind him, his young mistress Chloe crossed her arms, a smug smirk plastered across her face. But my eyes weren't on them. They were locked on the glass door. Standing just outside was my 8-year-old boy, Leo. He was clutching his ribs, tears streaming down his swollen black and blue cheek, the aftermath of a backhand from his own father, just because the kid accidentally caught them peeling each other's clothes off. The cold air from the gym's AC brushed the back of my neck. It woke up every survival instinct in me. This man had no idea that the stupid waiver he was forcing me to sign wouldn't protect me. He had just signed away his own chance of walking out of here. I slowly took off my soft cardigan, locking a dead stare onto the weakest meniscus joint in that 200-pound man's knee. Before I show you exactly how this piece of trash crumbled under my hands, hold on a second. Like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you understand a mother's rage when her child is touched. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone laid a hand on your own flesh and blood? Right now, let's rewind to exactly 3 years ago, so you can understand why. I willingly locked my own monster in an iron cage for this scumbag. 3 years ago. The attic smelled like stale dust and old fiberglass insulation. A single yellow bulb hummed a low, irritating frequency overhead, casting long, warped shadows across the wooden floorboards. I knelt on the rough planks, the splinters pressing into my bare knees. My fingers traced the coarse, cold metal edges of the silver star one last time. No tears. Crying was a useless waste of hydration. I folded the heavy green jacket. The dark, crusted stains near the collar were still there. Blood never really washes out. Below the fabric went a thick stack of medical reports, grainy x-rays of a fractured spine, notes from surgeons who swore I shouldn't be walking without a cane. I shoved them all into the bottom of a heavy black plastic storage bin. I slammed the lid down. Snap. The heavy plastic latches locked into place. That hollow sound closed out a decade of my life. I crawled backward down the narrow pull-down stairs, brushing the dust off my jeans. I grabbed a cheap plaid apron from a hook and tied it tight around my waist. I was trying to learn how to be a good suburban wife. A woman who worried about neighborhood HOA meetings and bake sales. A woman who definitely didn't know how to strip a heavy weapon in pitch blackness. The oak kitchen table felt suffocatingly small. Alex chewed his steak with his mouth open. His fork scraped against the porcelain plate, a sharp grating screech that made the fillings in my teeth ache. "Property taxes are up again," he grumbled, pointing his greasy fork directly at my chest. "And some idiot scratched the paint on the truck at the hardware store parking lot." Unbelievable. I sat perfectly still, chewed my food, even rhythmic bites. I used to make split-second life-or-death choices with a heart rate of 60. Now I had to fake a panic attack when the garbage disposal backed up just so Alex could grab a wrench, curse a little, and feel like the man of the house. He hated my silence. He wanted me flustered, nervous, like the other wives on the block. My dead-eyed calm poked holes straight through his fragile, paper-thin ego. Alex wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing grease across his knuckles. He reached into his pocket and tossed a crumpled letter onto the table. A bank loan denial. "Credit score is shot," he muttered. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing, pinning me down. He wanted to open a gym. Tanner Martial Arts. He'd been obsessing over it for months. His gaze dropped to my hands resting on the table. "That overseas pay, the hazard money, it's just sitting in the account gathering dust." I looked down at the crumpled paper. 6 years of sleeping in the freezing dirt. 6 years of dodging roadside blasts that rattled your teeth in your skull. That money was Leo's college fund. It was the only clean thing I brought back. But I didn't argue. You don't waste calories fighting a war you don't care to win. I pulled the leather checkbook from the drawer. My handwriting was stiff, sharp, angular. $150,000. I slid the check across the wood. Alex snatched it up. Not a single word of thanks. He folded the slip of paper in half and shoved it deep into the pocket of his leather jacket. He stood up, his eyes sweeping up and down my body. He stared at my faded gray t-shirt, the loose, worn-out jeans hiding my scars. He clicked his tongue in disgust. "Go buy some decent clothes, Jolie," he sneered, grabbing his keys off the counter. "You're stiff, boring, like a damn plank of wood. Women are supposed to have a little softness to them." He turned on his heel. The heavy front door slammed shut, rattling the cheap picture frames on the living room wall. I stood up and walked slowly to the kitchen sink. I turned the faucet on full blast. Freezing water hit my bare hands. It slipped through my fingers, pooling around the stainless steel drain. I looked up at the dark kitchen window. My own reflection stared back at me against the black night. A woman in a plaid apron, blank, empty eyes. The iron cage was locked shut. I stayed inside that iron cage for almost 3 years. The betrayal didn't hit like a sudden lightning bolt. It was a slow, dirty leak under the floorboards, rotting the foundation of our house from the inside out. Fast forward to exactly 3 months ago. The breaking point didn't start with a confession. It started with a smell. I stood in the cramped laundry room. The cold water from the washing machine dripped over my knuckles, reminding me of that freezing water at the kitchen sink. I held Alex's soaked workout shirt, his tight rash guard, over the open door of the front-load washer. Usually his gym gear reeked of sour vinyl mats, dried sweat, and cheap rubber. Not today. I pulled the heavy fabric closer to my face. The sharp synthetic sting of sandalwood body wash clung deep into the collar. It was cheap, cloying, familiar in all the wrong ways. He had started coming home at 1 in the morning, dragging his heavy boots across the linoleum. Inventory, he claimed, avoiding eye contact as he grabbed a beer from the fridge. Bookkeeping. His phone was suddenly a permanent fixture on the kitchen island, always placed face down. Screen locked. Notifications silenced. If you've spent a decade reading the twitch of a stranger's jaw in a pitch-black room to figure out their next move, spotting a middle-aged husband's sloppy affair is just basic math. 2 + 2. I didn't scream. I didn't throw porcelain plates against the drywall or dig through his jeans pockets while he showered. That night, while Alex snored loudly enough to rattle the bedroom door, I sat in the pitch-black kitchen. The pale blue light from the laptop screen washed over my calloused hands. I opened a private browser tab and pulled up our joint credit card statements. The card my squeaky clean credit score backed. My finger tapped the mouse, a hollow click echoing in the dead quiet of the house. $200 at a downtown steakhouse on a random Tuesday. Click. $150 at a lingerie boutique. Click. $80 in Uber charges to a gated apartment complex exactly 3 blocks from Tanner Martial Arts. I sat there staring at the glowing numbers. I was clipping coupons at the grocery store, doing mental math in the cereal aisle to keep our weekly food budget down, and he was swiping my name for cheap thrills. I exported every single month of data, encrypted the PDF files, dropped them onto a metal flash drive. Not a single tear hit the keyboard. Crying didn't fix a broken pipe, and it wouldn't fix this. It was just a cleanup job now. The next morning, I parked my rusted SUV across the street from the gym. I rolled down the window, letting the bitter Chicago wind bite at my face. I didn't hide. I just watched. 10 minutes later, the glass front door pushed open. Chloe Vance, 25, bleached blonde hair, ironed pin straight, wearing a skin-tight workout set that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Alex strutted out right behind her, his chest puffed out under his leather jacket. He laughed, that loud, obnoxious braying sound he used when he desperately wanted an audience. Right there on the public sidewalk, in front of a couple of high school kids coming in for a morning class, he reached out and slapped her ass. She giggled, leaning her weight against his arm. I stared through the dirty windshield. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't feel a shred of a scorned wife's jealousy. I just measured them, calculated the dead weight. They were acting like they owned the world. A world built entirely on the money I bled for. I shifted the car into drive and headed straight downtown. The law firm smelled like expensive leather and lemon polish, a sharp contrast to my faded jeans and worn-out boots. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, a thick, unsealed manila envelope sat on my passenger seat. Inside was a fully drafted divorce settlement. I didn't want a penny from his failing gym. I didn't want alimony. I just wanted full custody of Leo and my name scrubbed off the lease. I popped open the glove compartment, shoved the thick envelope all the way to the back under the dusty owner's manual, and snapped the plastic door shut. I planned to wait. Let Leo get through the Thanksgiving holiday. Keep the house quiet. Hand Alex the papers over a cup of black coffee on a Tuesday morning. I genuinely believed it would be a clean break. Sterile. No broken dishes. No bruised knuckles. But I completely misjudged the cruelty of a weak man trying to impress a cheap girl. The heavy oak front door slammed open, the brass knob punching a dent straight into the hallway drywall. Leo tripped over the threshold, his small sneakers catching the edge of the living room rug. He hit the floor hard. He didn't get up. My 8-year-old boy just lay there, curling his body into a tight ball, clutching his ribs. I dropped the laundry basket. I slid across the hardwood floor and fell to my knees beside him. Leo, look at me. He rolled over. The air sucked right out of my lungs. His left cheek was swollen, the skin burning a dark, angry purple under the yellow living room lights. Imprinted right across his cheekbone was the unmistakable wide mark of a grown man's hand. 5 thick fingers. His breathing was a mess of wet, broken hiccups. He kept apologizing. He had walked the 3 blocks to Tanner Martial Arts carrying a crushed bakery box of brownies. He wanted to surprise his dad. But he opened the door to the back office instead. He saw them on the leather sofa, Chloe's bare legs, his dad on top of her. Chloe had shrieked, pulling her shirt up, acting like a victim. And Alex. Instead of covering his son's eyes, instead of dying of shame, he panicked. He protected his fragile ego. He backhanded his own kid across the face to shut him up, shoved him out into the alley, and told him to get his disrespectful ass home. I sat on the floor holding a cold plastic ice pack against my son's face. The condensation dripped down my wrist, freezing against my skin. I didn't scream. I didn't smash a lamp or curse at the ceiling. The roaring heat in my chest suddenly vanished, replaced by a freezing, dead calm. My heart rate dropped, 60 beats a minute, then 50, then 40. I had spent years of my life using my own body as a meat shield for strangers in foreign dirt. And I had let my own flesh and blood take a beating in the safest suburb in Chicago. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. A text message from Alex. Taught the little brat some respect. He has no boundaries. Get your ass down here and apologize to Chloe, or you can kiss your custody rights goodbye. I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer blinding arrogance. I didn't reply. I pressed the power button until the screen went black. I helped Leo up and walked him to his bedroom. I pulled the heavy blankets up to his chin, handed him his tablet, and slipped his noise-canceling headphones over his ears. Watch your movie, I whispered, kissing his warm forehead. Mom has to go run a quick errand. I stepped out of his room and shut the door. I walked over to the smart security panel on the wall. I punched in the override code. Beep! The heavy steel deadbolts on the front and back doors slid locked. The house was now sealed. A vault. My kid was safe. Now it was time to handle the trash. I walked into the master closet and shoved past the row of soft suburban floral dresses. I reached into the far back corner and pulled out a heavy weather-beaten olive canvas jacket. The fabric felt stiff and rough against my skin. Familiar. I zipped it all the way up to my chin. I shoved my feet into a pair of scuffed leather boots and tied the laces tight. I stepped out into the garage. It smelled like old motor oil and freezing concrete. I climbed into the driver's seat of my rusted SUV and jammed the key into the ignition. The old V8 engine roared to life with a deep, guttural rumble. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white against the cold, cracked leather. Outside, the Chicago wind was howling, dumping heavy, wet snow across the black asphalt. I slammed the shifter into drive and hit the gas. The peace treaty was dead. The rusted SUV skidded hard, its tires grinding against the icy asphalt right in front of Tanner Martial Arts. I pushed the heavy glass door open. A wall of humid, stifling air hit me instantly. The whole place reeked of stale sweat, cheap synthetic rubber, and bad decisions. Harsh fluorescent lights glared down on the blue vinyl mats. Heavy hip-hop bass thumped through the cheap overhead speakers, rattling the front desk. About 20 guys were lifting weights and hitting bags. Right in the center of the mat, Alex stood close behind Chloe, his hands resting low on her hips, showing her some sloppy wrist lock technique. Behind the front desk, the teenage receptionist Tommy dropped his pen when he saw my face. I didn't look at him. I walked. A straight mechanical line cutting through the middle of the room. My heavy boots thudded against the floorboards. I didn't blink. I didn't slow down. The guys hitting the heavy bags stopped. The gym bros near the squat racks equipment bought with my hazard pay paused and stared. The crowd slowly parted instinctively, giving way to the cold, dead energy radiating off my olive green jacket. Chloe saw me first. She immediately shoved Alex away and backed up, throwing her hands over her face. She triggered the tears like a light switch. "Alex, it's her!" she shrieked, her voice echoing over the heavy bass. "Leo bit my arm this afternoon, and now this crazy bitch is calling my phone threatening to kill me." Cheap, manufactured victimhood. The gym rat started whispering, casting dirty looks at the middle-aged mother in the faded jacket who dared to interrupt their sacred gym time. Marcus Dunn, the washed-up assistant coach, stepped out from the shadows, crossing his thick arms, trying to look intimidating. Alex puffed out his chest, stepping forward to claim his territory. "What the hell are you doing here, you useless bitch?" he roared, making sure the entire room heard him. "I smacked that disrespectful brat to teach him a lesson you were too lazy to teach. If you don't get on your knees and apologize to Chloe right now, I'm throwing you out on the street with absolutely nothing." I stopped exactly 6 feet away from him. My posture didn't shift. Not a single muscle in my face twitched. "You put your hands on my son," I said. My voice was flat, inorganic. "Step on the mat, Alex." Alex threw his head back and laughed. A loud braying sound. Marcus chuckled. A few guys in the back whistled, mocking the plain, stiff housewife challenging the gym owner. Alex snapped his fingers at the front desk. "Tommy, bring the medical liability waiver." He looked back at me, his face twisted in a smug sneer. "Sign it, you useless bitch," he yelled. "Sign it and let's see if your pathetic arrogance saves your ribs from getting smashed to pieces. Sign it or I'll strip your custody rights and throw you out like a stray dog." The piece of paper hit the vinyl mat. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped right at the toe of my boot. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I bent down, picked up the pen from the floor, and signed my name. I pressed so hard the ballpoint tore a jagged line right through the paper. I tossed the pen away. I slowly unzipped my heavy canvas jacket and let it drop to the floor. I reached down and unlaced my leather boots, kicking them aside. I stepped onto the blue vinyl mat barefoot. The cold plastic felt familiar. I raised my head, locking a dead stare straight into the weakest meniscus joint of his left knee. Marcus clamped the cheap plastic whistle between his teeth. A shrill, ear-piercing shriek bounced off the mirrored walls, cutting through the heavy bass of the gym speakers. The guys lifting weights shuffled backward, pressing their sweaty backs against the drywall to form a wide circle. Alex didn't bother warming up. He stomped his heavy foot on the blue vinyl, charging forward like a cornered bull. He wanted this over in 3 seconds flat. A perfect, brutal strike to impress the cheap blonde standing by the water cooler. He dipped his left shoulder, twisting his thick waist. A classic sloppy street brawler move. He threw a massive overhand right. 200 pounds of angry, fragile ego barreling straight for my temple. It was an ugly, heavy swing. Tons of power, zero control. His entire ribcage was completely exposed. I didn't step back. I didn't squeeze my eyes shut. I didn't raise my hands to cover my face like a normal, terrified suburban wife would. Flinching is a physical reaction fueled by fear. It tenses the muscles. It gives the other guy a signal to push harder. I shut it all off. I turned myself into a vacuum. Total, absolute nothingness. My eyes locked onto the exact rotation of his collarbone. I let him bring the violence to me. When his huge, sweaty fist was less than an inch from shattering my cheekbone, I simply tilted my neck. I dropped my center of gravity and slid my left foot across the mat. Exactly 3 inches, not 3.5, not 4. Just 3 inches of empty air. The punch tore through the space where my head used to be. The sheer force of it created a loud rushing whoosh right past my ear. I could smell the sour stench of his deodorant as his arm flew by. The punch slammed into absolute nothingness, taking all his manufactured petty rage with it. Physics is a cruel thing when you don't respect it. Missing a target with that much weight means the momentum has to go somewhere. The massive force of his own swing ripped him forward. Alex's boots slipped on the sweat-slicked vinyl. He lurched past me, his thick arms windmilling desperately in the air, just to find a wall, a person, anything to keep him from eating the floor. His face flushed a deep, panicked red, his mouth hanging open in pure shock. The whispering in the room stopped. The mocking smiles on the gym bros' faces evaporated instantly. The gym went dead silent. Only the heavy, clumsy thud of his boots, stumbling across the floor, echoed around us. I want to pause right here for a second. Have you ever had to deal with an arrogant bully who thought they were the biggest, toughest person in the room? Someone who used their loud voice to make you feel small. If you've ever had to stand your ground against a person like that, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now to support this story. And drop a comment below, just type the word yes if you know exactly how satisfying it feels to watch a bully completely miss their shot. I didn't turn my head to watch him stumble. I didn't need to. I already knew his exact coordinates in the room. I stood perfectly still on the cold mat, taking a slow, even breath. I was positioned at a precise 45-degree angle, right in the dead center of his blind spot. He was off balance, gasping for air. His back was completely exposed, his 3 seconds were up. Mine were just starting. Alex caught his balance against the wall, his chest heaving heavily under his leather jacket. Humiliation washed over his face, turning the skin a dark, bruised purple. Missing a wild punch in front of his cheap blonde girlfriend and a gym full of guys paying him for lessons had completely shattered his fragile ego. He spun around, his heavy boots squeaking against the blue mat. I could hear his teeth grinding together over the heavy bass of the gym speakers. He dropped the pretense of a proper stance. No more boxing, no more gym owner swagger. Just pure, dirty street violence from a man terrified of looking weak. He loaded his weight onto his back foot, his thick thighs bunching up under his jeans, and launched a vicious, sweeping low kick. He aimed the heavy arch of his foot right at the outside of my right knee. It was the kind of cheap, desperate shot designed to snap ligaments and fold a person in half. He wanted to break my leg. He wanted to watch me crumple to the vinyl mat, crying and begging for his forgiveness in front of his friends, just like he always imagined a good submissive wife should. I didn't dodge. I didn't step back to avoid the impact. If you keep slipping away, a fight just turns into a marathon. I don't run marathons, I end things. Instead of retreating, I took one sharp, deliberate step forward. I stepped directly into the path of his incoming kick. I slightly bent my right knee, turning my toes outward. I rotated my shin, presenting the thickest, most conditioned edge of my tibia bone straight into the incoming trajectory of his lower leg. I didn't use muscle to block him. I didn't push forward with aggression. I used basic anatomy and structural physics. I planted my bare foot hard against the mat, turning my leg into a solid, unmoving concrete pillar to absorb his momentum. Alex swung with absolutely everything he had. Snap. The sound was sharp, dry, and deafening. It echoed off the mirrored walls like a thick, dry oak branch getting snapped over a heavy knee. It was the sound of a total structural failure. Alex's shin bone slammed full force into the rigid edge of my tibia. The violent discrepancy in leverage and bone density produced an immediate, devastating result. His fibula cracked under the intense pressure. The meniscus in his knee shredded under the sheer, brutal force of his own kinetic energy. For one single agonizing second, there was total silence in the room. Then Alex let out a high-pitched, shrieking wail. He sounded exactly like a stuck pig. The tough guy gym owner completely vanished, replaced by a broken man screaming at the ceiling. He dropped his hands, clutching his shattered shin, and fell backward. He hit the mat with a heavy, wet thud that shook the floorboards. He curled into a tight, pathetic ball on the floor. His face turned a sickly, pale white. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking his hairline and stinging his eyes. Snot and tears streamed down his face, mixing together over his trembling lips, as he groaned, thrashing blindly on the mat. He reached out his fingers, clawing at the blue vinyl, looking for a hand to pull him up. No one moved. Marcus, the assistant coach, stood frozen near the front desk. The plastic whistle hung loose from his mouth, bumping against his chin. He forgot to blow it. The gym bros hugging the walls just stared in absolute shock. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a single word. In a normal gym, this is where the match ends. The referee steps in, someone runs to the freezer to grab an ice pack. People clap out of respect, and everyone goes home safely to their families. I didn't stop. I didn't break eye contact. I slowly uncurled my fists and took a slow, heavy step forward. My bare feet made a soft shh sound as they slid across the vinyl. My shadow stretched out under the harsh fluorescent lights, completely covering his trembling, broken body. He was still breathing. When a man like Alex drops to the floor, you don't stand over him and gloat. You crush his ability to get back up. I didn't hesitate. I circled behind him. He was still curled on his side, whining through spit and tears. I dropped my weight and drove the hard heel of my palm straight into the soft spot right beneath the base of his skull. The blunt impact short-circuited his nervous system. His head snapped forward, his face bearing heavily into the blue vinyl mat. Before he could process the shock, I grabbed his thick right forearm. I twisted his wrist outward and levered his arm sharply up against his own back, driving his shoulder down into the mat. A dull, heavy pop echoed in the room. His right shoulder slipped completely out of the socket. The joint was dislocated, useless, dead weight. I planted my knee directly onto his floating ribs, pinning his massive torso to the floor. The remaining air in his lungs rushed out in a pathetic, wheezing gasp. I slid my left forearm under his chin. But I wasn't looking for a clean submission. I wasn't a jiu-jitsu guy hunting for points on a scoreboard. I pressed the hard bone of my forearm directly across the cartilage of his trachea. With my free right hand, I grabbed a fistful of his sweat-soaked hair and yanked his head backward, hyperextending his neck, completely exposing his airway. I locked the hold in tight. Air stopped moving. Alex began to thrash. He bucked his hips, twisting like a fish suffocating on dry pavement. His bulging eyes rolled wildly in their sockets, thick with muddy, absolute terror. The thick blue veins on his neck popped, straining against the skin. The bruised purple hue of his face rapidly darkened into a terrifying, oxygen-starved violet. His left hand, his only working limb, shot up in the air. Smack! 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 His heavy palm slapped frantically against the vinyl mat. Tap out. He was tapping out. In his world, that was the ultimate rule. You tap the mat, the referee blows the whistle, and the pain stops. You get to breathe, drink some water, and walk away. I ignored the sound. I didn't loosen my grip a single millimeter. I wasn't playing a sport. The gym rules didn't exist anymore. I clamped down harder, cutting off the absolute last thread of oxygen reaching his brain. His frantic tapping turned weak, sluggish. His jaw locked up in a tight spasm, and a wet gurgling sound rattled deep in the back of his throat. His entire body started to go limp, surrendering to the heavy, crushing pressure of my arm. I leaned my head down. I pressed my lips right next to his sweaty cauliflower ear. My voice was a thin, flat razor blade slicing right through his fading consciousness. "Tapping out is your rule, Alex," I whispered, keeping my tone perfectly even. "But slapping my son, that costs you your life." I started counting in my head. Slow, methodical. 1. His chest stopped heaving. 2. The whites of his eyes rolled back. 3. The sour smell of cold, terrified sweat poured off his skin. 4. He was teetering right on the absolute edge. I held him there, forcing his brain to fully process the freezing, quiet reality of his own death. I wanted him to feel exactly how small, how fragile, and how completely powerless he really was. 5. I slowly loosened my arm. I opened my hand. The heavy dead weight of Alex's skull dropped from my grip, hitting the blue vinyl mat with a hollow thud. I uncoiled my legs from his ribs and stood up. I took one step back, my bare feet quiet on the mat. Pure habit took over. I reached down and smoothed out the wrinkled hem of my faded gray t-shirt. I brushed a piece of lint off my jeans. The entire gym watched me do it. At my feet, the owner of Tanner Martial Arts was nothing but a pile of garbage on the floor. Alex curled his thick body inward, his knees pulled up to his chest. His mouth hung wide open, dragging in desperate, jagged mouthfuls of air that sounded like torn paper. He started coughing, a wet, violently hacking sound. He dry heaved twice before spitting a thick pool of slimy saliva right onto the custom-printed logo of his own gym mat. His right arm hung uselessly from his shoulder socket, swinging limp like a broken door hinge every time his chest spasmed. The heavy, humid air in the gym had completely frozen. The catcalling was gone. The snickering was gone. The fake, aggressive alpha male energy that filled the room just 5 minutes ago had evaporated into total, cowardly silence. Marcus Dunn, the loudmouth assistant coach who was ready to mock me earlier, stood absolutely paralyzed next to a heavy bag. The plastic referee whistle slipped from his lips and hit the floor. He didn't bend down to pick it up. Tommy, the 19-year-old kid behind the front desk, was literally shaking, trying to make himself smaller behind the computer monitor. The rest of the gym bros had backed away until their shoulders touched the mirrored walls. Their eyes were wide, darting from Alex's broken body on the floor to my completely blank face. They looked at me the way you look at a loose, unpredictable animal in a closed room. Not a single one of those tough guys stepped forward to help their boss. I ignored them. A mob of cowards holds zero value. I took a slow, deep breath, regulating my heart rate back to its resting rhythm. I turned my head. My eyes swept across the silent room, sliding past the squat racks and the dumbbells until they stopped dead at the narrow corner near the equipment closet. I found the source of the rot. Chloe Vance was pressed so hard against the drywall, it looked like she was trying to melt into it. She had both her manicured hands clamped tight over her mouth to trap a scream. Her whole body was shaking, shivering like a wet dog. The smug, arrogant girl who had just smirked at me while rubbing my husband's chest was completely gone. Her heavy makeup stood out in stark contrast to her skin, which had drained to a sickly, chalky white. Her fake crying victim routine had dried up the second she saw real consequences hit the mat. She looked at Alex choking on his own spit on the floor and finally realized that the strong, wealthy gym owner she thought she had stolen was just a pathetic, weak man. And she realized that the boring, worn-out suburban housewife standing 10 feet away could snap her neck like a dry twig without breaking a sweat. I have a question for you. Have you ever watched a fake manipulative person realize that their lies can't save them anymore? If you know exactly how satisfying it is to watch the mask fall off a hypocrite, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Drop a comment below and just type the word mask if you've ever had to expose someone's true colors. Chloe's knees wobbled. Her glossy lips trembled uncontrollably. I didn't say a word. I just started walking toward her. The soft, slow slap of my bare feet against the mat echoed in the dead quiet room. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the punch. I stopped exactly 1 arm's length away from Chloe. She squeezed her eyes shut. She pulled her thin shoulders up to her ears, cowering against the drywall. She was bracing for a punch, a slap, anything that would tear her pretty heavily contoured face apart. I didn't raise my hands. Using my hands to hit a cheap homewrecker would be an absolute insult to the years of blood and discipline I'd built into this body. I didn't earn my scars to squash bugs. I just looked down at her. The heavy synthetic smell of her cheap sandalwood perfume was suffocating up close, but under it I could smell the sour, unmistakable stench of pure, terrified sweat. I looked at her with nothing but cold, clinical disgust. I reached back without looking. My hand slipped into the deep side pocket of the heavy canvas jacket still lying on the floor behind me. My fingers closed around the thick manila envelope I had pulled from the glove compartment earlier today. I lifted the unsealed envelope. With a single sharp flick of my wrist, I tossed the thick stack of papers right at her chest. Thwack! The heavy legal documents hit her collarbone. The loose pages scattered, fluttering through the stifling air like dead leaves. They drifted down in a chaotic mess, covering the blue vinyl mat all around her sneakers. Bold black letters. Red ink stamps from a downtown notary. Divorce settlement. Division of assets. Eviction notices. I'm leaving this trash for you, I said. My voice was a thin, quiet blade sliding right under her ribs. He's your prize. Keep him. Chloe's eyes shot open. Her frantic gaze darted down to the papers scattered over her shoes. The color drained from her neck, leaving her skin ash gray. Every single asset. I continued, keeping my tone perfectly flat. including this gym which was built entirely with my money. The lawyers will tear it in half in court. You just won yourself a broke, crippled man." Her lips parted, quivering uncontrollably. Her hands shook as she grabbed her elbows, trying to hold herself together. The arrogant little girl who thought she could steal a wealthy gym owner's life had just realized the truth. She hadn't won anything. She was just the garbage collector picking up the toxic, broken mess I was throwing out on the curb. I leaned in slightly. I locked my eyes dead onto her dilated, terrified pupils, backing her even tighter against the wall. "But remember this," I whispered so low only she could hear it over the heavy breathing of the gym rats behind me. "If you or him ever come within 100 yards of my son again, next time I won't let go of his neck." She didn't nod. She couldn't even breathe. She just stared at me, completely paralyzed. I turned my back to her. I bent down and grabbed my olive green jacket, shaking the dust off the heavy fabric. I slipped my feet back into my scuffed leather boots. I didn't bother tying the laces. I walked straight across the gym. My heavy boots thumped against the floorboards, a slow, steady rhythm cutting through the silent room. Not a single person moved. The mob of gym bros stayed glued to the mirrored walls, watching me leave the destruction behind. I pushed the heavy glass front door open, stepping out into the freezing black night. I pushed my shoulder against the heavy glass door of Tanner Martial Arts. The rusted hinges let out a sharp squeak before the door slammed shut behind me. It locked the heavy, sour smell of sweat rubber and lies inside that building. I stepped out into the black Chicago night. The freezing winter wind whipped straight across the parking lot, biting into my cheeks. I pulled the collar of my olive green canvas jacket up around my neck and let out a long, slow breath. The condensation plumed in the freezing air. I didn't feel a sudden rush of adrenaline. There was no proud, victorious smile on my face. Breaking a man like Alex didn't bring me any joy. It was just a dirty, exhausting chore. Like scrubbing black mold out of the bathroom grout or taking out a trash bag that had been rotting in the kitchen for 3 years. You don't celebrate taking out the trash. You just wash your hands and finally enjoy the clean air. I kept my back completely straight as I walked across the empty asphalt. The freezing wind tore at my loose t-shirt underneath the jacket, but I welcomed the bite. It felt grounding. Real. My unlaced leather boots crunched heavily into the thick layer of fresh, wet snow. With every single step, a piece of the last 3 years fell off my shoulders and stayed buried in the slush. The fake suburban dinners. The forced smiles at the hardware store. The quiet, pathetic compromises to protect a weak man's ego. It was all gone. I headed straight for the far corner of the lot. My rusted SUV sat idling under a flickering yellow street lamp. A thin layer of frost coated the edges of the windshield. Through the glass illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard heater, I could see Leo. I had pulled him out of bed, buckled him safely into the truck with the doors dead-bolted, and left the engine running while I went inside to settle the final bill. He was curled up in the passenger seat, wrapped tight in a gray fleece blanket, hugging his knees to his chest. When he saw my silhouette walking toward the headlights, the terrified tension in his small shoulders dropped entirely. A massive, relieved smile broke across his swollen, bruised cheek. He knew his mom was coming back. I pulled the heavy metal handle and opened the door. The biting cold wind rushed into the cabin, immediately fighting against the dry, comfortable heat blasting from the vents. It smelled like old coffee and warm dust. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the heavy door shut, sealing the two of us inside our own private vault. The heavy, dead-eyed shell I had to wear in that gym completely cracked open. It melted right into the heated fabric of the car seat. The hands that just shattered a man's bones suddenly felt soft again. I wasn't the cold shadow standing over a broken man anymore. I was just a mother. I turned to my right. I reached out my calloused fingers, gently brushing through Leo's soft, messy hair. I leaned over the wide center console, pulled his small blanket-wrapped body into my chest, and pressed a long, deep kiss right against his forehead. "We're going to our new home," I whispered into his hair. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask about his dad. He just nodded, burying his bruised face into the rough fabric of my heavy jacket. I reached down and pulled the gear shifter into drive. The old V8 engine let out a low, steady, reassuring hum. The heavy tires grabbed the slush, crushing the snow as we pulled out of the parking lot. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, steering the truck away from the dark, suffocating suburban streets, heading directly toward the bright, glowing orange lights of the interstate highway. The iron cage was finally empty. Thank you for staying with me through this freezing, heavy night. Don't ever let anyone trample on your boundaries or make you feel small, even if they share your last name or live under your roof. You are worth more than the compromises they force you to make. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to read your thoughts, so drop a comment below and share your own experiences. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to save yourself and the people you love? Tell me about it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story of healing and fighting back.